and greetings on Friday, United States of America. Figure 1. Workers' confidence in having enough money to live comfortably throughout their retirement years. Worker confidence in having enough money to live comfortably throughout their retirement years. And we've got very, somewhat, not too, not at all, and don't know. So if it's not at all confident in having enough money to live comfortably throughout their retirement years. United States workers. Going back to 1993, it went up. We're starting at the bottom, in the dark, they're very confident they're going to live comfortably. 18% in 1993, going up to 27% in 2007, and that was because their house prices were going up all the time. But now they're not so damn confident. Down to 14% are very confident that they're going to live comfortably. The great big block, which is the blue block, of they're somewhat confident, was 55% in 1993, and that's now down to 38%. Not too confident, not too confident, 19 is now up to 24, and not at all confident, it was 6 in 1993, and is now up to 23. That's the big mover, from 6%, not at all confident in having enough money to live comfortably throughout their retirement years in 1993, up to 23% are now not at all confident. Moving on to figure 6. Worker confidence in doing a good job of preparing for retirement. So you're asking a worker, are you doing a good job of preparing for retirement? Or are you confident that you're going to be able to do a good job? Not much movement here. 21% were very confident in 93, 19 now. No movement. The big bulk, blue, 47% were very confident, now 45% are very confident. Not too confident was 18, and now it's 17. Not at all confident was 12, it's up to 19, but not much of a move. Thinks. What does this mean? I've given it a little thinks, and I'll tell you what I thinks it thinks. I think that these people are not confident, or are still confident that they are doing a good job in preparing for retirement. They, personally, are doing all they can. They're doing their best job that they can to prepare for retirement. But it must be some other bugger that's ruining all their confidence from the first figure, from the first graph. That's the government. In other words, the people themselves think that they are doing a wonderful job, but they're not confident they're going to get their good retirement now because of some other bugger, and that some other bugger or group of buggers is the government. It's all the government's fault. Get a grip, America. Moving on to Prague Cap. So, at the top in grey, we have a quote. An ordinary recession can be ended by the central bank lowering the interest rate again. A normal recession, business cycle recessions. Since the Second World War, lots of them. And they can be ended by the central bank lowering interest rates again. A deleveraging is much harder to end, according to Mr. Dalio. Dalio, top hedge fund manager. And when I say top, I mean top. And this deleveraging isn't part of the business cycle wibbly-wobblies. It's a great big 80-year block, kind of Great Depression to now sort of thing. According to Mr. Dalio, it usually requires some combination of debt restructurings and write-offs, austerity, wealth transfers from the rich to poor, and money printing. So you can tell that it's going to take a while if it's going to include wealth transfers from rich to poor. As I've said for a long time, the last American dream is that everything will be all right as long as we take the money from the rich. It'll come one day, and money printing there, and that a beautiful deleveraging is one in which all these elements combine to keep the economy growing at nominal rates. That is higher than the nominal interest rate. You get 2, 3, 4% on whatever short-term safe account you've got, or investment paper, and that means that the GDP growth should be 3, 4 or 5% above that minimum interest rate. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Mr. Dalio expects America's GDP growth to average only 2% over a 15-year period. 2% average, 15 years. I suggest that the American people start recalculating their confidence in their retirements, because bonds will be low as well. These are good thoughts. This is Cullen Roche Pragcap cutting in now and talking to us. These are good thoughts. One of the main reasons we started MMR, we'll come to it next, but MMR is because so many people didn't want to look into MMT, because they could just throw the excuse out that, well, it's only modern monetary theory. Oh, it's only a theory. I shall not bother going into it at all, because it's only a theory and it'll probably change. In other words, it was pure laziness. So to stop that laziness, they've gone to MMR instead, was to bring some balance back to the focus on the horizontal money level, and specifically credit. Horizontal money is bank money, vertical money is government money. As regular readers know, I am keenly aware of the credit cycle and its impact on this particular cycle, resulting in the balance sheet recession, because he likes Richard Koo too. It's important to understand that the credit markets and the tapping of credit markets is what primarily drives the business cycle. And as we know from the recent crisis, it can at times get wildly out of control. Understanding Dalio's broad perspective here will help you grasp these important concepts. There should be nothing there that we don't know. But it always needs reiterating. And the next link is to Pragcap's Modern Monetary Realism, Economics Without Politics. Start learning. Link below. Right, we're going to go to the Bank of International Settlements and a speech, a presentation given by Vitor Constancio, who is Vice President of the European Central Bank, and this was given at the 26th International Conference on Interest Rates, Frankfurt, 8th of December 2011. Don't you wish you were there? So he kicks off with the ladies and the gentlemen. Since the introduction of the euro, our common currency, times have never been as challenging as at present. Despite ongoing efforts by policymakers, the sovereign debt crisis is still ongoing, putting growth and welfare of our citizens at risk. Can you imagine how many people are going to sleep? In this context, the Governing Council of the ECB met this morning and, as you know, decided to reduce the monetary policy rate by 25 basis points and take a series of measures to improve liquidity provisions to the banking sector, thereby enhancing operations of the credit channel. So the credit channel is what we've dealt with over the last 10 days or so. It's a channel. It's a way of getting what is base money out to the real world. But of course he's talking crap. And those extra provisions are the Eltro. So from the bulk of the presentation, his speech, we'll listen to this with regard to MMT and the way economists, more economists, standard normal economists, think banking works. But they don't know how banking works, because you don't have to understand banking or accounting to be an economist, which is pretty bloody incredible. And I'll just repeat again, these economics model, these economists that make models always have finance as a pass-through. They, as in it doesn't exist. Money comes into the banking system and out of the banking system. It is not perturbed. And why? I could tell you. I'll tell you. Because they say that if there are savers on one hand and spenders on the other, nothing changes. The actual amount of money is the same, and it's just you're either a saver or a spender, but the actual balance of money doesn't change. So you can forget finance. And they do forget finance. You don't need to know anything about finance to be an economist. Utterly incredible, but it's not part of their models, so they don't need to learn it. And that's why they know nothing. However, it should also be noted that the rate of growth of the total euro system balance sheet between end of November 2007 and end of November 2011 was a mere and only 88%, whereas the Federal Reserve was 219% and the Bank of England was 191. Aren't we doing well? But subsequently, as I've pointed out, through Eltro and other things, the ECB has come up with the Fed and the Bank of England as well now at those big numbers. Here is what we need to know to drive home for maybe the last time that all these reserves in the Federal Reserve and in other central banks will not lead to inflation. Why? Because this nice man says so. And he's talking at a central bankers conference. He's not going to stand there and tell them total crap. He might talk total crap, but the actual, when he's throwing what are facts out, he's not going to throw out dodgy ones. Central bank reserves are held by banks and not part of the money held by the non-financial sector. You can understand that. Held by banks at the central bank, they're not out in the real world. Hence not per se an inflationary type of liquidity. That's it in a sentence, but we can go on. There is no acceptable theory linking in a necessary way the monetary base created by central banks to inflation. Excuse me. Nevertheless, it is argued by some that financial institutions would be free to instantly transform their loans from the central bank into credit to the non-financial sector. This idea that they've got this much in the central bank and they can multiply that up 10 times. So if they've got $1 billion here, they can make, I don't know, $1 trillion or whatever it is. It's bollocks. Nevertheless, to the financial sector, this fits into the old theoretical view about the credit multiplier, according to which the sequence of money creation goes from the primary liquidity created by the central banks, we know what that is, to total money supply created by banks via their credit decisions, the outside world. I'll read that again. This fits into the old theoretical view about the credit multiplier, according to which the sequence of money creation goes from the primary liquidity created at the central banks to total money supply created by banks via their credit decisions. Now, via their credit decisions is, we won't say it, but just making money out of thin air. In reality, the sequence works more in the opposite direction, with banks taking first their credit decisions, have a loan, have a mortgage, whatever, and then looking for the necessary funding and reserves of central bank money. What Steve Keen's been saying all this time, and what one or two other people have been saying all the time, against what everybody else says, especially economists, and the majority have all been wrong. As Claudio Borio and Disyatat from the BIS put it, in fact, the level of reserves hardly figures in banks' lending decisions. Dun, 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 dun. How many times do we have to say this? And now, I mean, everybody more convinced now that a central bank is saying it? The amount of credit outstanding is determined by banks' willingness to supply loans based on perceived risk-return trade-offs and the demand for those loans. And that is it. People walk in and want a loan. They've got a message from head office saying, all other banks are lending, so we will lend, because when we lend, they lend, the money goes out, comes back in deposits and drops into the banking system, and that way we will get our reserves. And if we have to wait while they're dropping in, we just borrow some extra money from the central bank. No worries. In modern banking sectors, credit decisions precede the availability of reserves in the central bank. As Charles Goodhart pointedly argued, it would be more appropriate talking about a credit divisor rather than a credit multiplier. End of that story, end of that story. Right, let's pop out to the real world and Europe, and the Eurozone's car market continued its decline in February, shrinking 12% from a year earlier. Registrations down, demand major markets such as France and Italy. Note, this is the total nominal hourly labour costs across the European zone and the European currency using zone. The averages there are on the left, but if we have a look, Germany and Austria are pumping their wages quite hard. Germany at 3.6, Austria at 3.9. There's a chance that those countries, the big creditor countries, start to get some inflation going and do some big consuming. France should not be up there at 3.4. That is far too big a number for France. Let's just jump over to the far left. Ireland and Portugal, just where they should be. I know it's hard, but that's where they should be at minus 1.7 and minus 1.7. They've got to be getting their competitiveness up by getting their total nominal hourly labour costs down. The problem is the yellow splodge in the middle. España, still pumping it up at 2.9. Absolutely ridiculous amount, and is just adding to their uncompetitivity. They are shot. Right, let's go to Ed Harrison and credit write-downs. A bit about China, but reintroducing Sir Thomas Arthur Lewis. Well, I've talked of a couple of times, but what Lewis found is that industrial wages rise very quickly when the supply of excess rural labour is exhausted. This is called the Lewis turning point, and is where China is right now. The Lewis turning point, when you've run out of peasants to pull into your city. And then the city is pumping and working their factories, but there's no more cheap labour coming in to keep labour costs down, and labour costs have to rise. This will have major implications for the Chinese domestic economy and the world economy. The first implication is inflation. Without the endless stream of excess rural labour, wages are going to go way up in China, and this means inflation will be a problem. Over the last 20 years, the introduction into the global economy of the former Eastern Bloc and China has meant a huge surge in labour available. Despite a flood of money from the Japanese and US central banks, this influx of labour has effectively capped consumer price inflation in developed economies. The result has been the so-called Great Moderation. If China has reached its Lewis turning point, all of that is out of the window, and central banks will face a Scylla and Charybdis inflation challenge for years. That's between a rock and a hard place, or trying to sail between a very bad and a very bad, and trying to get right up the middle. China's labour shortage will work in concert with resource constraints and likely excess money supply as an inflationary force. These forces are countered by major deflationary forces from the debt overhang resulting from the implosion of the global asset bubble. We are seeing those deflationary forces in Greece right now. Okay, so those are the big forces, the debt overhang and deleveraging of the Western world, and the rest of the forces for inflation generally coming from happenings in the Eastern world. Boogie. Friday, so I'll leave you with something to read. I found this fascinating, although it's about programming, computers and all that sort of stuff. It's the Slate, and it's called Where's Why, and it's about code called Ruby, and it's quite long, but I found it a fascinating article if you have time. And even if you're not into geeky things like that, which normally I'm not, you might, like me, find it a fascinating article to pass a little time on. Otherwise, have a good weekend. I might see you at the weekend. If not, not. Bye.